Is it possible for somebody to feel their neshama in a conscious way? If yes, what steps does one have to take? I think the answer to this question is we all do and none of us do. In terms of what steps a person has to take, let me first explain. What do I mean when I say all of us do and none of us do? All of us do because we all have moments when we're extreme in our Yiddishkeit, moments that could be called moments of tshuva or moments of Mesiras Nefesh, where we stand for something without any constraint. We have certain clarity that something is right, and we're prepared to stand for it at all costs, and we don't let anybody stop us. And there's a clarity and a simplicity about our approach. I think that's a neshama-like experience. It's not a normal, it's not a consistent neshama-like experience, it's a neshama-like experience. On the other hand, I don't think any of us experience it because I think the idea of experiencing the neshama in a way that's pneumistic, that's connected to daily avodah, is very rare or not at all possible in our generations. In the Rishimis of the Rebbe, which is private conversation between the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe, there are references to avodah mesudara. Avodah mesudara means avodah has to say they're orderly avodah. And if I understand it correctly, avodah mesudara, this is a real deep Chabad chassid who's consistent about his chassidus. In other words, he's not up and down. He's not up and down because of mistakes, because of nisyonis, because of difficulties. And he's not up and down because of any factors. He's consistent and constant in his avodah. This is the optimum Chabad chassid, what's called avodah tama lebeinani. And such people who have incredibly strong minds, and are dedicated to avodas Hashem till Mesiras Nefesh, which means, in other words, that as intelligent as they are, they know that serving Hashem is more important than their intellect and their knowledge. I think for such people, the concept of knowing your neshama in a regular, consistent way is real and true. But I think this is a very rare thing, even in earlier generations, even like Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe and things like that. In the Chabad culture, we talk about Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Even Ava v'Yireh isn't really necessarily an experience of Elokus. It could be experience of the Midas of the Nefesh HaLekis, if we're refined, the Midas of Nefesh HaSichlis, or the Nefesh HaBahamis, if we're not so refined. But the idea that says in Tanya Perek Lamed Gimel, that through his bonus a person achieves Emunah Zu Ki Rabba, which is the idea of Boch HaBakuk B'Hamid and Alachas Shenem V'Tzadik B'Nosa Yichal Tikri Yichel Yechaya, as if all 630 mitzvahs become one single mitzvah, Hi Ha'emunah Levada, which is the true source of the idea that through avodah pnimis a person could reveal his neshama. I think this is very, very rare, very, very, very unusual. The requirements for this to be realistic are so many that it's beyond the scope of the conversation even just to list them. And of course included in that list would be, like it says in the Rambam Megillat Nevuah, Giber, Onav, Chocham. I'm not saying on the Madreg of Nevuah, this is a much, much, much lower level. But Giber, Shehu Mizgab al Yitzrei, Ve'en Yitzrei Mizgab al Alov, and so on. In other words, the characteristics necessary for a person to be an Neshama Yid on a Pneumistic level is very, very rare and unlikely. The definition of tzaddikim, even tzaddikim poilin, certainly those who were Bali Ruach HaKodesh, Bali Moifis, and Go'inim and Iglan and Nister, they served Hashem on the Neshama level. And I suppose you could say that when you use the word Talmud by Chassidus rather than the word Chassid, I think that's one of the ways of demarking the difference between the two terms. A Talmud is someone who, like his Rebbe, has a Shachas to Pnimis, a Shachas to Neshama. So, I guess the short answer to your question is I think it's very unlikely. But then you're going to come back and retort and say, wait a minute, isn't the whole union of Hasidus? The idea that through avodah, through a skashis, to a tzaddik, we have a connection to our own neshama. So how does that work out? So I think there are several answers to that. One is, even if you don't experience the neshama, we could live like we have a neshama on the surface. You know, the examples that Tanya brings, that the neshama symptoms are simcha and clarity about the Eibishter, unity, avas Yisrael, metanemes, and then emunah, a sense of the reality of Hashem. You can bring yourself to a place in avodah where these things are real for you, even if they're not literally in mamish from the nefesh halakis. I also think that tmimus, sincerity and simplicity, and real genuine simcha, if they're constant or if they're momentary, are experiences of the neshama. But I guess in conclusion, what I'm saying is that the relevance of the neshama to Chassidim today, above all else, is listening to what the Rebbe says, with the focus on Lei HaMedrash Ikir Ela HaMaiseh, HaMaiseh Hu Ikir. Action is the main thing. That when we do the mitzvahs, when we do the mitzvahs and the heroes of the Rebbe, B'Maiseh B'Pel Mamish, it doesn't make us a neshama person, but it takes us out of ourselves and it brings us into a space which is closer to the inyan of Elokus and the neshama. And of course, this includes very, very much serving Hashem b'simcha, trying to achieve a level of betachan, terach gut, ve'etzayin gut, and so on. These midas, these tchunes, are neshama tchunes. And certainly for moments we have a connection to these things.